Hello makers, welcome to 3D Maker Noob. I'm Joe, and today I'm going to give you my initial thoughts on the Tronxy P802MA. Stick around. Welcome back makers. So as most of you know, I've embarked on a journey this year, and that is for me to purchase a printer under $300 every month and review it for you guys, depending on what you guys want me to review. The popular demand for January was the Anet A8, so naturally I went on AliExpress, I ordered an Anet A8, and I received a Tronxy. I wasn't entirely surprised, to be completely honest, because it turns out it happens quite a lot. Granted that most of the times I saw this happening, it was on eBay, not on AliExpress. After careful review of the advert that I saw on AliExpress, at least the photo, it did show an Anet A8. However, the text could have been a bit misleading. I just saw Anet A8 and I decided to purchase it. So first suggestion, make sure you're buying an Anet A8. Make sure it specifically says Anet A8 and no other derivative words of riprap or Prusa or anything like that. Make sure it has an Anet logo sticking on the picture, an A8, and ideally someone who has a lot of positive reviews in terms of feedback from customers who received the Anet A8. So seeing as the printer was here anyway, I thought to myself, might as well do a live build and test this thing out, which I did. For those of you guys that joined me, you saw that the build was okay. It wasn't a perfect build. It took me about 3.5 hours in total. I did come across quite a few snags. Initially, before I even started the build, was the X mounts for the motor and the belt holder on the other side. These were severely warped. I mean, to an extent that the Z-rod goes in and gets stuck halfway due to the extreme warping of the nut that goes through. So what I had to do is actually put in the Z-rod, heat it up with a heat gun until it becomes soft, and then just literally bend it back into place enough for the rod to be halfway to being perpendicular. It worked. It did work because it is printing and I'm still using it with those parts, even though I printed additional parts on the Prusa just in case as a plan B. But those worked. During the build, what I didn't like, the screws, they all came bunched up in one bag, and that just kills me because you have a lot of different sizes. On the instructions, you get much more sizes specification of screws than there actually are in the bag. So you have 2 different sizes of screws, if I remember correctly. And through the instructions, you have about 4 or 5 different types of screws in terms of sizes. So you just have to figure out whether to choose one or the other based on a guessing game. However, we managed. I build the printer, as I said, it took me about 3.5 hours, which is fairly okay. The instructions leave a lot to be desired. Why they're fairly okay. It seems like there's a lot of parts which are missing. All the instructions for this thing comes in about, I think it was like 9 pages in total. That's a lot of parts, and that's a lot of too little pages for my liking. But I managed. If it was someone who's just starting out, I can see this being a bit difficult. Having said that, I built it, and it was time to switch it on. Now, for those of you who were with me during my live build, you know exactly what happened. I turned the power on, and my live stream went off. And the reason for my live stream going off was due to the fact that the power supply tripped the electricity of the whole building. So I had to run downstairs, put everything back on, restart the stream, and not be able to start the printer. So what I did was I used the PSU from my Micromake Delta in order to switch it on, just to see if it works. It worked. It works fine. I'm still using that power supply because I'm still doing testing on it I'm just not putting a heavy load. As far as I can, I do not heat up the heat bed, and I just use PLA, and I'll get into that. It was a bit upsetting. Following that live build, I did a few testing, and it seems that the PSU is shorted out completely. I've changed wiring. I tried everything. It just keeps shorting out the electricity to a certain extent. I'm not trusting it at all. I wouldn't even want to fix it. So what I have done is I ordered a new power supply. Next up came the bed leveling. Now I need to point out that Tronxy comes with an SD card packed with instructions. How good those instructions are, that's a different story. But it does have instructions. I'll grant them that. The bed leveling instructions are thorough but unclear. In terms of the English they use, leaves a lot to be desired. So it makes it sound much more complicated than it actually is. So much so that during the live stream, I kind of gave up on trying to figure out how to level it exactly. So I was kind of adjusting it on the fly in order to get a decent first layer, which I did as a first layer. So what I did was I used the G-code, sorry, the STL file that came on the card, which is a 20 by 20 millimeter calibration tower. Ran it through Repetier Host, which is the software that comes with the printer on the SD card, and I tried to print it through USB. The results were very, very disappointing. This thing was falling apart, adhesion, under extrusion, everything that could possibly go wrong with a print, it went. After this, I ended the live stream, and I was pretty deflated. I was regretting getting this printer, but I'm not the type of guy that gives up, as you guys probably know. So what I did was I came back here when I was nice and calm without the live stream, and I decided to print a file which was on the SD card, and that's a calibration tower, a 40 by 40 calibration tower, G-code. I inserted the SD card directly into the printer, and this glorious thing came out, and I could not believe how good it turned out. Okay, it's not perfect, but it turned out really, really good for the kind of experience I had so far with this printer. Calibration wise, very little off. It came to about 39.96 or 97. I'd say that's really good. I actually posted photos of my calipers on Twitter of this. This was pretty spot on. Having done that, I was actually feeling a bit overconfident. So what I did was I printed a Benchy. Yes, I know, I actually took it there. I was seriously impressed with the quality of this Benchy. I wasn't expecting it to be perfect, obviously. And the only thing that I can see wrong with this Benchy, at least from my little experience in 3D printers, is Z-banding. And I kind of knew why that was. But other than that, other than the Z-banding, the overhangs were pretty much spot on. The bridging, fair enough, not perfect, but okay. So I kind of felt confident enough that, okay, I need to really put this printer through its paces. Obviously then I decided to try Angus's torture test, which is the lattice cube. This was coming out quite good. The only reason why I stopped this was because I had to leave the house for the weekend, and there was no way in hell I was trusting this printer printing alone while no one was in the house. I took this with me just so I can inspect it, and I could see that while it was printing okay, the overhangs on the far side of the printer were far from being perfect. So I thought to myself, okay, so the issue here is probably the Z-banding and also the cooling. It has a very effective fan on the front side of the print and possibly on the sides, but the back, not so much. So having come back from the weekend, I decided it was time to start testing out this printer. The first thing I did was I installed the two brackets that you see up here, the red ones. I had printed these on the same day as the build on the Prusa i3 Mark II. Now the reason why I installed these and I didn't print another two parts with the printer itself is for two reasons. One, they were already printed. I didn't want to waste any filament. Secondly, due to the fact that the printer printed this calibration tower of 40 by 40 pretty much perfectly, I assumed that it would have absolutely no issues printing these two parts. Once I printed those, I opened Simplify 3D and I created a profile based on a generic Prusa for the Tronxy. First thing I printed after that was this fan shroud I found on Thingiverse. This unfortunately turned out to be fairly short and it doesn't really reach the nozzle, so I kind of discarded that. I put the original fan shroud back in and I decided to print this. This is a low poly Yoda. It came out almost perfect. I was extremely surprised with this. This was printed without any supports. I was seriously amazed. And I thought to myself, okay, now I really need to torture this. So what I did was I printed a fan shroud, something very similar to the other one. However, I kind of used Mesh Mixer to elongate it a bit just so it can reach the nozzle a bit better. So I tried to print this, well, let's call it a torture test, shall we? Because it actually is a torture test. The first one was a bit of a fail because I had started playing around with the level height, the Z offset. I didn't get it right, so this kind of came off the bed. The second one I tried was getting severe curling. The new fan shroud just wasn't effective enough, so I stopped that print and I decided to install the original fan shroud once again. I have now come to the conclusion that, at least for now, that is the best fan shroud for this printer. It delivers quite a lot of cool air and instantly cools down the filament, which is why these overhangs are, I'd say those are almost 90 degrees and they printed out beautifully. Either way, I printed this, and this, as you can see, actually came out quite good, except for that reason. While it printed well, yeah, it leaves a lot to be desired. Strictly speaking, I don't think this is meant to be printed without any support whatsoever. It just cannot work. However, I did print it. It did print. Unfortunately, what was happening is when I was trying to put all the connections into place so I can twist it and turn it, I broke it. And that made me sad. But I moved on. Now, what I wanted to do next was to compare prints with the other printers. At this point, I was a bit impressed with this printer. So I thought to myself, let me print the same tests I had done to compare the other three printers and see which printer I can compare to the most. Every single print I have here, one of them is done with the Tronxy and the other one is done with the Prusa i3 Mark II. Now, by no means I want to set this printer in the same level as the Prusa i3 Mark II. I wasn't expecting to. The price difference is quite great, and there are a lot of reasons why. But in terms of print quality, I just wanted to find the closest print that it can be comparable to. The first one was Rexor Castle. If it wasn't for the fact that the Tronxy prints very shiny, it's just like the Wanhao Duplicator i3 Plus. And I've come to the conclusion that the reason why it's shiny is because it's not an E3D V6 nozzle, which is everything I have on the other printers, except on the Wanhao and on this. So that is probably why it's shiny. Having said that, the prints they're glorious. I can really compare them to each other. There's very little difference between the two other than the shininess. And I was completely blown away by it. Next up, the Groot. I know I swore to myself I wouldn't print this again, but at this point I was so impressed with it that I really wanted to try it out. So I put some Faber-Dachery brown and I started printing. It printed on the first try to a certain extent that at one point I couldn't tell which is which, apart from very little Z-banding on the chest of Baby Groot here. These turned out really good. So I'm quite happy with that. Next up, I did 2 low poly models. I did low poly Pikachu, which is scaled up to 150%. Once again, slightly comparable. There sometimes something happens with this printer. It kind of, there's the Z issue might still be attributed to the fact that these parts were warped. I have replacement for these which I had printed, which I will install and test out. But so far it's performing fairly well. Next up, last but not least, is a low poly totodile. I honestly, it's very difficult for me to tell which printer printed which unless I see at the bottom what I wrote. Something very interesting happens here, that both of these prints, one is printed on the Prusa i3 Mark II, the other one is printed on the Tronxy. At certain levels of the print, both of the printers do something very weird, and I don't know if it's something to do with the style of the printer and how it works. I don't know if it's because of the slicing, or I don't know if it's because of the model. But if you look closely under the chin or along the mouth, it's like, I don't know if it's called a Z-banding or under extrusion, but it happens identically at the same place. And it just seems a bit weird. So if anyone knows why this would happen on 2 completely different printers, please let me know. So that is all the test printing I have done so far. I really wanted to get out this review because the live stream didn't go as great as I had planned. Many things went wrong, few things went right, but I wanted to show the possibilities of this printer. As you can see, I've compared the prints to the Prusa i3 Mark II. I'm not saying they're exactly the same, but out of the printers that I have, those were the most comparable to. It is also very quiet. I'm actually amazed at how quiet this printer is. It doesn't go over 61 decibels, which is the quietest I have out of all the printers. Having said that, I need to point a few things out. First of all, the warped parts. Wasn't very happy with that. If someone didn't have the tools or didn't have a little bit of knowledge and buys this as a first kit, they will not get this printer running. It would be impossible. Secondly, the instructions, they leave a lot to be desired. The English could be much better, and they actually complicate things even more than they actually are. After figuring out how to do the bed calibration, I couldn't understand why they overcomplicated it so much on the instructions. Thirdly, the power supply. That was the biggest letdown for me. Now granted, not every power supply is going to be like that. I would hope not. But it was of a real concern, because if someone didn't have a trip switch for the electricity, that could have resulted in a short or a fire, and that's is of concern. Having said that, there's a reason why I am not going to compare this to the Prusa i3 Mark II directly, because first of all, the price point is about 500 euros apart. That's way too much. Secondly, those 500 euros, you are investing in a lot of other things. You're investing in safety, you're investing in quality, you're investing in support, in instructions, and everything else that comes in between. I'm not going to say it's not worth having this printer, but I would not recommend this printer as your first ever printer unless you have a bit of knowledge in terms of tinkering, you have a lot of patience, you take every single precaution necessary, because if something goes wrong with this printer in terms of electricity wise, power supply, you could get hurt, and I wouldn't want that on anyone. It pains me. So that is it for me, guys, today. I will do a full review of this printer. These were just my initial thoughts. I want to play around with this printer. As you can see, wires are still hanging out. I haven't done anything to it apart from upgrade these brackets up here. I will replace the brackets here. I will add a cover to the Melzi board. I will get a replacement power supply. I will put a cover on that. I will upgrade everything that I can upgrade on this printer, because I want to see its full potential. And one of the things I'm definitely going to do is change the head to about an extruder style and install an E3D V6 nozzle, because I am really happy with those and I love the way they print. That is it for me, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I hope I didn't upset any of you. It's my honest opinion. It's my own. No one paid me for this review. I am telling you guys what I think for this printer. I'm loving the prints. I have my concerns on the printer. Thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe, leave me a comment. I'll be happy to reply. I will leave a link in the description for everything I've printed, including the parts. In the meantime, happy making, guys.